Every winter, farmers burn through fortunes on soybean feed, clearing rainforests for fields that take months to harvest. But there is a native plant, often dismissed as pond scum, that produces 10 times more protein per acre, harvested every morning, not just once a season. This floating green milk can turn barnyard waste into high-protein feed, and it was once a Cold War secret for keeping cosmonauts alive on missions to Mars. Why are we overlooking a plant that could rewrite the entire equation of global protein, land, and survival? The answer begins with the true cost of your next glass of milk. Soybean meal sits at the center of the global livestock economy, quietly shaping the fate of farmers and forests alike. Each year, more than 80% of the world's soy harvest goes not into tofu or human foods, but into animal feed. For most dairy and poultry operations, soy meal alone accounts for between 50 and 70% of all feed costs. That single line item can make or break a farm's survival through winter. Yet the price of soy is anything but stable. Over the past 2 decades, global soy prices have swung wildly, doubling in some years and plunging in others. In 2012, a drought in the United States sent futures soaring past $600 per ton, only to tumble below $300 per ton 3 years later. Farmers, caught in the crossfire, have little power to hedge against these swings. For every dollar added to the cost of soy meal, thousands of small operators are pushed closer to bankruptcy. The economic pain goes far beyond the farm ledger. To keep up with rising demand for animal protein, vast tracts of land are cleared every year, especially in the Amazon basin. Producing 1 ton of soy protein requires between 2 and 4 hectares of arable land. In Brazil alone, more than 3 million hectares of rainforest have been cleared in the last decade, much of it for soybean cultivation. Each hectare lost means more carbon in the atmosphere, more wildlife displaced, and less resilience against drought and flood. This cycle is powered by a simple equation. Animals need protein, and soy is the cheapest, most convenient source. But convenience comes at a hidden cost. Diesel fuel powers the tractors and combines, and pesticides and fertilizers flow into rivers. By the time a ton of soy meal reaches a feed trough, it has carried with it a heavy burden of land, water, and fossil energy. For the farmer, every bag of feed is a gamble. Will prices spike before the next shipment arrives? Will a new trade war or flood wipe out supply? The risks are baked into every glass of milk, every dozen eggs, every burger patty. The world's appetite for animal protein is growing, but the system that feeds it is stretched thin. Behind every winter feed delivery lies a chain of costs, risks, and losses that ripple from farm gate to rainforest edge. The question is not just how much protein we can produce, but at what price and who pays it. A typical feed budget starts with a single, stubborn number, the cost per ton of protein. For most farmers, this figure is chained to the price of soybean meal, which rises and falls with global markets, weather, and the latest trade dispute. But what if that number could be rewritten, not just trimmed at the margins, but fundamentally reimagined? Consider the economics of a pond, not a field. No tractors, no diesel, no endless rows to plant and harvest. Instead, imagine a shallow pool no deeper than a child's wading pond, lined with a living carpet of green. Here, the inputs shift. The water comes from rain, runoff, or recycled barn effluent. Fertilizer is often unnecessary because nutrients arrive as waste from the very animals being fed. The biggest expense is a simple net or screen used each morning to skim the surface and collect the day's growth. Unlike soybeans, which demand months of patient waiting and a fleet of heavy machinery, this aquatic crop offers a daily harvest, fresh protein ready before breakfast. There is no need for pesticides or herbicides. The entire process can run on gravity and sunlight. On the ledger, the capital costs are modest. A lined pond, a pump if gravity will not do the work, and a few hours of labor each week. Operating costs shrink even further if the system is set up to recycle nutrients from livestock waste. Instead of buying nitrogen by the ton, the farmer reroutes it from the barn gutter to the pond. The numbers tell their own story. While a ton of soybean meal protein may cost anywhere from $400 to $700, plus the hidden expenses of land, fuel, and chemical inputs, a well-managed pond can generate protein for half that price, sometimes less. In Flanders, a trial pond system produced protein for about €700 per ton, but when manure fed, costs dropped below €500. On a spreadsheet, the difference is clear. Pond-grown protein is not just cheaper, it is less volatile, insulated from the shocks that rattle global commodity markets. The daily harvest changes everything. Instead of a single risky payout at the end of the season, the farmer gets a steady trickle, protein on demand every morning. It is a feed system that matches the rhythm of the animals themselves. The promise is simple, a new line on the farm budget, one that is smaller, steadier, and less dependent on distant markets. The question, of course, is what kind of plant could make this possible? A protein test begins with a handful of green, waterlogged plants, each no bigger than a grain of rice. In the lab, these samples are rinsed, dried, and ground to a fine powder. The next step is a standard protocol. A portion is weighed and then run through a nitrogen analyzer, a machine that reveals how much protein is packed into every gram of dry matter. The results are clear and repeatable. In controlled assays, duckweed consistently delivers between 40 and 45% crude protein by dry weight. That figure is not an outlier. Peer-reviewed studies led by researchers like Appenroth and Statlander confirm the number across multiple species and growing conditions. For comparison, the industry standard, soybean meal, clocks in at about 37% protein on the same dry basis. The chromatograph readout from a typical duckweed sample shows a dense, even spread of amino acids, with peaks for lysine and methionine, two of the most important building blocks for animal growth. Analysts flag the sample as exceptional, not just for its total protein, but for its quality. In practical terms, this means that gram for gram, duckweed can deliver more usable protein to a cow, chicken, or pig than the soybean meal that dominates global feed rations. There is a catch, of course. Protein content can vary. Wild duckweed pulled from a roadside ditch might test as low as 20% protein, while plants grown on nutrient-rich water, especially with added manure, reach the upper end of the scale, pushing toward 45%. In commercial pilot ponds, where conditions are carefully controlled, batch after batch lands in the 37 to 43% range, matching or beating soy. This is not just a laboratory curiosity. In feeding trials, animals fed duckweed-based rations gain weight at rates comparable to those on traditional soy diets. Nutritionists reviewing the data do not dispute the numbers. The protein is real, it is digestible, and it is available every day the pond is harvested. For a farmer, this is more than a statistic. It is a potential replacement for the most expensive line in the feed budget. The only remaining question is whether this high-protein plant can be produced fast enough to meet the daily needs of a working farm. A pond thermometer floats just below the surface, its digital readout hovering between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius. Beside it, a light meter records the intensity of the midday sun. These are not just numbers, they are the secret to what happens next. In these conditions, duckweed enters a kind of biological overdrive. Each frond, barely the size of a lentil, splits and multiplies, turning a thin green film into a dense mat overnight. In controlled trials, researchers have documented this phenomenon with relentless precision. Under optimal warmth, steady nutrients, and abundant light, duckweed doubles its mass every 16 to 24 hours. Imagine a pond covering 1 acre. At dawn, the surface is half covered in green. By the next morning, every open patch is filled, the plant population having multiplied itself. Farmers who monitor their ponds with simple instruments, checking temperature and tracking sunlight, see this transformation firsthand. A single day's growth can add 20, 30, even 50 grams of fresh duckweed per square meter. Over a week, the numbers compound. What began as a thin layer becomes a thick, buoyant carpet, ready to be harvested with a net or skimmer each morning. This pace defies the logic of traditional agriculture. In a soybean field, months pass before a combine rolls through for harvest. Here, the cycle resets every day. But the system is sensitive. A cold snap, a cloudy stretch, or a drop in nutrients will slow the expansion. In practice, farmers keep a close eye on their meters, adjusting water levels and feeding schedules to keep the conditions just right. Too much shade and the doubling slows to a crawl. Too little nitrogen and the plants pale and stall. But when the balance is struck, the output is astonishing. Every 24 hours brings a new harvest, a fresh layer of protein lifted from the water's surface. The logistics of such rapid growth, skimming, drying, and storing become the next challenge, but the throughput is undeniable. In the right pond, with the right care, duckweed turns sunlight and waste into a daily bounty, rewriting the math of protein production. A nutritionist sits at a steel lab bench, reviewing the amino acid profile from the latest duckweed harvest. On paper, the numbers are striking. Most feed crops, corn, wheat, even soy, fall short on at least one essential amino acid, forcing farmers to buy supplements just to balance their rations. Lysine and methionine are the usual culprits. Chickens, pigs, and fish cannot make these on their own, and without enough, growth stalls and feed is wasted. In duckweed, those gaps are nearly invisible. The profile shows lysine levels that rival or exceed soybean meal, and methionine values that sit comfortably above corn. For monogastric animals, those with a single-chambered stomach, this is a rare find. The plant's amino acid spread aligns more closely with animal protein than with any traditional crop. Digestibility is the next hurdle. It is one thing to have protein on a label, another for an animal to actually use it. In controlled studies, researchers measure what goes in and what comes out, tracking amino acids through the digestive tract. The results for duckweed are unusually strong. Ileal digestibility, the gold standard for pigs and poultry, lands between 80 and 90% for most essential amino acids. That means nearly every gram of protein is absorbed and available for growth, not lost as waste. In feeding trials, broiler chickens and piglets fed duckweed-based diets show weight gains and feed conversion ratios on par with or better than those fed soy-based rations. The nutritionist points to the methionine line, a number that often limits growth in fast-growing animals. Here, duckweed's value stands out. Methionine at 0.5 to 0.8% of dry matter, lysine at 1.5 to 2%. These are not theoretical numbers. They match the requirements set out in feed formulation handbooks. For fish, the story is similar. Tilapia and carp, when offered duckweed as a primary protein source, meet their growth targets without the need for fish meal or amino acid additives. The plant's low fiber and nearly complete amino acid spread make it a true, complete protein for non-ruminant livestock. For farmers, this means a ration that needs fewer synthetic supplements, less imported meal, and less guesswork. Nutritionists reviewing the data agree duckweed is not just high in protein, it is formulated by nature to meet the needs of the animals it feeds. The last question is not about quality, but about how this plant fits into the daily rhythm of a working farm. A barn gutter drains into a shallow lagoon, carrying with it the runoff from a night's worth of feeding and milking. Instead of becoming a waste management headache, this nutrient-rich water is redirected into a lined pond where a floating mat of duckweed waits. The plant's appetite is relentless. As the effluent circulates, duckweed absorbs up to 95% of the nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients that would otherwise pollute streams or require expensive treatment. Every molecule of ammonia, every dissolved phosphate, is captured and transformed into new plant tissue. Farmers who retrofit their barns with simple piping and a gravity-fed flow system watch their waste become feed. In-pond probes monitor nutrient levels, letting them fine-tune the balance. Too much ammonia and growth stalls, too little and protein content drops. A well-managed pond becomes a living filter. As the duckweed thickens, it locks up nutrients at a rate that rivals commercial water treatment plants. Each morning, a skimmer glides over the surface, lifting out a fresh harvest. What was once manure is now high-protein biomass, ready for the ration mixer. The dual benefit is clear. Cleaner water leaves the pond, and the animals get a feed that is both rich and digestible. Field trials show nutrient removal rates consistently above 80%, with some systems achieving 95% uptake. For the farmer, this loop means less fertilizer to buy, fewer pollution headaches, and a new way to turn yesterday's waste into tomorrow's milk or meat. Under the microscope, azolla, a common floating fern, shows thick walls of lignin and fiber, the tough stuff that gives plants their structure. For cows and goats, that fiber is manageable, even useful, but for chickens, pigs, and fish, it becomes a roadblock. Their single-chambered stomachs cannot break down the woody layers, so much of the nutrition passes through untouched. That is where duckweed stands apart. Duckweed tissue is almost pure soft cell, with no woody stems and no rigid walls. Fiber assays confirm it. Duckweed contains less than 5% crude fiber by dry weight, and its lignin content is so low it barely registers on standard tests. This low fiber profile matters. In practical terms, nearly every gram of duckweed can be digested and turned into energy or growth. Nutritionists point out that for monogastric animals, this is a rare advantage. Unlike soy hulls or azolla, which can gum up the works, duckweed slips through the digestive tract with almost no waste. In feeding trials, chickens and piglets fed diets high in duckweed did not just gain weight, they showed improved feed conversion, meaning less feed in and more growth out. The softness of the plant also means it can be pelleted or mixed into mash without extra grinding or processing. For the farmer, that translates to lower feed costs and less mess in the barn. This low-fiber edge opens the door to new applications, especially in systems where every point of digestibility matters. The next frontier lies just below the water's surface, where fish graze directly on duckweed mats, turning this soft plant into pure protein with almost no labor at all. A farmer stands at the edge of a pond, watching tilapia glide just beneath the green surface. There is no feed bucket in sight. Instead, the fish graze directly on a living ceiling of duckweed, snipping at the soft fronds as they drift by. This is not a science experiment. It is a daily routine in small aquaculture operations from Bangladesh to Brazil. The savings start the moment you stop hauling sacks of imported fish meal. In controlled trials, tilapia diets replaced up to 30% of conventional fish meal with duckweed without sacrificing growth or survival rates. Feed conversion ratios, how many kilos of feed it takes to produce a kilo of fish, held steady, sometimes even improving thanks to the plant's high digestibility and complete amino acid profile. For every ton of fish produced, hundreds of kilos of ocean-caught protein are left in the sea. The labor savings are just as real. Instead of blending, pelleting, and distributing feed, the farmer manages a cycle. Keep the pond water rich in nutrients, let the duckweed multiply, and let the fish do the harvesting. No need to skim or dry the crop. Tilapia and carp swim up and eat it fresh, reducing waste to nearly zero. The system even closes the nutrient loop. Fish waste fertilizes the duckweed, which in turn feeds the fish. This synergy has been documented in polyculture setups, where fish yields rise by 10 to 20%, and water stays clearer thanks to the duckweed's appetite for ammonia and phosphorus. In these ponds, the line between feed and environment blurs. The result is a protein engine that runs on sunlight, recycled nutrients, and the quiet work of grazing fish. No factory trawlers, no imported meal, and almost no hands-on feeding required. A scoop of duckweed fresh from the pond weighs heavy in the hand. It is almost all water and barely a trace of solid matter. To become winter feed, that moisture must go. The process is simple. After harvest, the wet plants are spread thin across mesh screens and set out under the open sun. Within hours, the green mat shrinks and crisps, trading its spongy weight for a brittle, concentrated flake. 100 kilograms of wet duckweed yields just 5 kilograms of dry matter, provided the drying is fast and complete. Farmers check progress with a handheld moisture meter, aiming for less than 10% water content. Too much, and the flakes risk mold. Too little, and they crumble to dust. The transformation is dramatic. What started as a wheelbarrow of slop now fits in a feed sack, dense with protein. Each flake locks in the nutrients and amino acids, ready for storage in bins or barrels. This dried feed keeps for months, immune to cold or damp. When winter closes in and the pond lies dormant, these green flakes become a lifeline. They are poured into the ration mixer alongside hay and grain. The workflow is quiet, repetitive, and precise, an old farm rhythm adapted for a new kind of crop. A flask of duckweed slurry sits in a university lab, swirling under a nitrogen-starved regime. Over days, the plant's metabolism shifts. Instead of packing every cell with protein, the fronds begin to store starch, sometimes reaching 50% of their dry mass. This switch is not just a quirk of biology, it is a built-in insurance policy for farmers and processors alike. By adjusting nutrients, a pond can pivot from producing high-protein feed to a feedstock for ethanol or bioplastics, without replanting or new infrastructure. On paper, this flexibility opens up a suite of new revenue streams: protein for livestock, starch for fermentation, and the option to toggle between them as market prices shift. Meanwhile, another branch of the duckweed family is making its way into the health food aisles. In Southeast Asia, tiny Wolffia species, sometimes called water lentils, have been eaten for generations. Now, under the brand name Mankai, these plants are processed into a tasteless green powder that has been cleared for sale in the European Union as a novel food. Nutritionists tout its protein density and complete amino acid profile, marketing it as a superfood for smoothies and supplements. Regulatory hurdles have been cleared in key markets, and metabolic studies confirm its safety and digestibility for humans. For duckweed growers, the emergence of Mankai and the starch switch are more than scientific curiosities. They are real-world pathways to diversify income, hedge against commodity swings, and tap into both the feed and food sectors. An economist reviewing the numbers points out that this kind of versatility is rare in agriculture, where most crops are locked into a single market. Here, a single pond offers multiple harvests, each tailored to demand. Every pond destined for livestock feed begins with a checklist. Before the first harvest, water samples are drawn and sent to the lab for heavy metal screening: lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury, all measured by ICP-MS down to the part per billion. Only if levels fall below regulatory limits does the harvest proceed. Next, a composite sample of duckweed is tested for pathogens: E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria. Weekly, these checks repeat, and any spike triggers a halt, a flush, and a retest. For ponds fed with barn effluent, this protocol is not optional. It is the line that keeps the feed safe and the farm in compliance. Beyond safety, the environmental perks of duckweed systems are quietly dramatic. A mat of duckweed covering the pond acts as a living lid, cutting evaporation by about 20% in field trials. In drought-prone regions, this means thousands of liters of water saved each season, simply by letting the plant do what it does best: float. Meanwhile, every day of growth pulls carbon from the air and locks it into new biomass. Lab measurements show that a well-managed duckweed pond fixes carbon at a rate comparable to the most productive croplands, though not quite matching the highest claims made for forests. The real value comes when the pond is harvested and the carbon is removed with the crop, rather than recycled back into the atmosphere. Distinguishing duckweed from algae is more than a technicality. Algae blooms can release toxins and are nearly impossible to filter out. Duckweed, by contrast, is a vascular plant, easy to see, easy to scoop, and free from cyanotoxins when grown in clean water. For every new system, a compliance officer's logbook tracks these safeguards: weekly test results, evaporation rates, and carbon data, all checked before the economics are scaled up. In the 1970s, a team of scientists in the Soviet Union set out to solve a problem that had stumped every space agency on Earth.